Now I have my colors here. Let's now proceed to color the canvas. For me, before I try to paint my canvas, I would like to render it in white first and then cover the painting lightly. We need the white to be as thin of a mixture as possible, because if we create our mixture too thick, and it would cover the whole outlines here, so in that case we can't see where we sketched our outlines. Okay, we won't see where we sketched our image, because if it's too thick, then basically it will cover all the outlines out. So that way I make the viscosity of my paint a little more thinner. Okay, so now we will basically cover the sketch up, but afterwards when we cover it, we would see like a very light strike from the outlines that you could see here in the background. Okay, so first we would just cover the whole canvas with white. As you could see, the whole canvas is just lightly covered, and you could still see the outlines coming through. And this would be served as a base for your canvas, so that your paint wouldn't be absorbed that much by the canvas. Because if you don't try to base it, or as we call, like, buffer it, it typically means that our canvas will eat most of the colors, and then you would typically have a hard time covering our paintings again and again with the specific colors. So we usually do this so that we don't run out of colors easily. So yeah, this serves like as a buffer for your paint when you try to apply it. I'm using like a 1.5-inch paintbrush, so that it would be quick for me to cover the whole canvas. So now I'm just rendering everything here. And yeah, basically that's it. We could still see the outlines that is bleeding through. If you see a darker sketch coming out, then we should probably cover it again, so that in that case it would be even throughout the canvas, that the sketch is lighter at the back. Okay, we're done. So now we need to wait for like 10 to 20 minutes for it to dry, and then we could proceed with our paintings, and then we could proceed to put up the colors that we would like to use. So 20 minutes has passed and the canvas is already dry. So now let's start coloring the canvas. I always like to start with the background, because if I layer first on the background, and if I have some mistakes on the characters or the things that I try to paint, I could easily cover it. And so I start basically first at the background, just cover it lightly. So take note where are the shapes that you don't want to cover, or try to avoid it, so that you won't have a hard time afterwards. So yeah, basically hit those spots where you want your background to be. And when you see your sketch here, it's still visible, so you want to try to avoid them, so that you could still see the pattern of your image that you want to paint. Stroke it a little bit. This here, and there. And then you see I still have the dark blue color here. So yeah, we'll just add this up to create like a much more darker effect. And then as you see, I'm just dabbing it on the canvas. So it will create a rough texture around it. Essential part to remember here, you always need to wash your paintbrush on water so that it won't be stiff, or it won't also bleed through the colors that you want to paint and proceed with it. So we basically need to wash it every time we use a different color. So basically, I already let the background dry for a little bit, and now it's dry, so we could layer our different colors here. And we could now proceed with this strap right here. So we'll be putting it in orange. So now I'm layering this orange onto the background. And always make sure that the background or the paint that you just layered has already dried perfectly, because if it's not dry and you try to layer it, it would smudge. It would smudge on the paint that you layered first. Like you see here, it doesn't mix with the blue because the blue is already dry. So it is very important to wait for it to dry out before layering it onto the canvas. So we're slowly processing here. And always take note that you should start from the background before you create the full detail of your painting. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of white in order for us to create highlights later. So now technically I'm just gonna use this dark orange to create shadows. As long as the paint is still wet, you could create like a much more softer effect for it, for the shadows. Because if the paint is dry, you won't be basically be able to like blend it a little more. So you need to be fast with it. As long as the paint is still wet, you could still give it a soft blend. You could always have like a rug for you to wipe off excess paint from your brush, because sometimes the brush tip has some paint build up on the top of it. So yeah, you need to remove the excess paint sometimes that builds up, so that you won't be having trouble shaping your painting. We will start with the birds. So these are doves. I would like to cover them first in white. Then afterwards, we will be adding up details for the birds in gray. Okay, so that it would have like a depth effect. These are the wings. I'm just using a brush with a tip so that I could create a much more sharper detail on the tip of the wings. So we're shaping it right now. Always remember to like know the pattern of your sketch, or if you get lost on the pattern of your sketch, you could always look back at your sketch on the paper like this. You see, we still have the sketch here, right? So we still know how to create our painting, because if we get lost and we still have a guide, like a different guide, so this will be like our pattern to remember where we should put up the details. Because if we get lost and we cover all of the sketch here on the canvas, so sometimes we can't see the lines on where we put it, so it's much better to still keep your rough sketch as a guide. So right now I will be using a fine tip brush so that we could create the shapes of the bird perfectly. So we need to add some little bit of blues here so that we could see the value of the bird, because it has like an excess detail on it. So yeah, we need to scoop out the excess white using the blue color, then adding up some little bit of whites so that it will blend in perfectly. There you go. So now it is shaped as the bird. We will proceed to add the details afterwards. But make sure to let the paint dry at first, like a little bit, and then that's how you build up the details. Because if you try to paint it now without the final form that you have already put up, and then if you're happy with it, then you add the details. But if not, once you already rendered the whole form, that's where you add the details. Okay, so now if we're happy with our painting, that's when we build up the full details for our painting. So now what we're gonna do here is we will build up the details and then the shadows of the birds. So the paint has already dried for a little bit. Now we could layer the details on the birds. So now I'm using gray. These are gray tones. I could use the dark ones and the light ones so that we could create like depth and some shadows around the wings, and then at the back tips of the details for the feathers. So if you can't smudge the paint, you just need to spray a little bit of water in it. Sprinkle a little bit of water so that the viscosity of the paint would be much smoother to apply. So now I'm just adding up the details of the feathers here. So here's a pro tip. So I don't have brown, but I'm gonna combine the red, yellow, and black to create a color brown. So right here, I'm just gonna add up the black a little bit on the yellow. Yes, and then I will smudge a little bit of red to it. And what this does, it mixes the color, because on acrylics, it creates a more different color hue when you try to mix it. So now I'm just basically just mixing it a little bit here. So now it slowly turns into brown. Then when I want it much more darker, I could just scrape a little bit of black here and then adjust the colors until I could create a vibrant brown here and a much darker one. So here you go. Now it looks like an earthy color. It has like a very much darker color to it. So if I want to adjust it, I just scoop up a little bit of yellow. Just apply a little bit of yellow here. These are the tricks that nobody teaches more on other tutorials, but I just discovered for myself, but I think it works well. As you could see, it's already mixing up. Now it's like a muddy color. I'll just scrape a little bit of red. And then I'm just gonna mix it well here until the earthy color becomes more vibrant. And there you go, we have brown. But basically we call it raw sienna. There you go. So now we could apply the brown here onto the details of the birds, right at the beaks and at the legs. So let's start with it. So right here, I will start to apply the details on the eyes of the birds. So I'm gonna start with a very light sienna right around the eyes. And please make sure that you put up the details perfectly right where the eyes is positioned. Okay? So here we already added sienna around the eyes. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of brown underneath it so that I would create like a shadow effect. There you go. Nice and smooth. Just a tiny bit, because first and foremost, even the tiniest letters, the tiniest details will affect the painting on perception and the depth of the details that you're creating. So yeah, we're building up the eyes now. I'm gonna apply a little bit of black here, the center. So if your paint won't smudge good, just apply a little bit of water to it. Just spray it with a bit of water so it will dampen the paint. So now I'm just gonna mix it with the water so much be easier to apply. And here we go. We're gonna apply it to the eyes now. So now right here at the last part, we will create the hand. So I already layered like light sienna that we made earlier. So now I'm about to put up some details to it so that it would pop up more and would create like a 3D effect to it. So basically, I just started with very light mix of sienna, and then now I will proceed to put up the highlights and then the shadows to it. So now we'll just add up the strings here and there, so it would like connect the strings here to the hand that is holding the strings. So yeah, we will just add up some strings here that just chipped off, and then we'll proceed with the painting as finished, and afterwards this is gonna be the final product. So this is the finished painting. This is the painting that we sketched earlier. So yeah, this is it. We call it Freedom. And if you like the video and if you learned something, hope it will be the way to develop your skills. And then I hope you learned a lot about what we discussed today. And thank you very much for watching. And thank you for learning with me so that you could develop your skills in art. And if you would love to paint in the future, please do. I encourage you to paint more.